Hello again, my adventuring companions. It is I, Retrowave, and I've came to realise that it's been a while since I've last been an absolute glutton for punishment. I've been playing games that have been conforming to my playstyle and letting me soar through them with absolutely no issue. Sometimes that's maybe just a bit too easy. No. Sometimes I just need a game to pin me down and spit on my face as it laughs at my impending misery. That's right, sometimes I just need a Sierra game. It's been quite some time since we last covered Sierra games. In fact, it's been nearly a year since the last Noir Reservoir episode covering King's Quest II was released, which was an absolute pleasure to make, and I am forever thankful to everyone who supported watching this man-child get bitchy about dying in Sierra games constantly. It means a lot. But more importantly, it's also been nearly 3 years since I last covered Sierra's other juggernaut, one of its most iconic series to rule the video game markets in the 80s and the 90s. And I am, of course, talking about one of Sierra's most successful franchises, Space Quest. Back in 2021, we looked into the initial foray into Sierra's galactic adventures, starring renowned janitor Roger Wilco, an outlandish tale of sci-fi wonder and hilarity that has made it a cult classic for many gamers, especially to all my friends out there approaching 50. We did it, gang. I've always admired the Space Quest series, so it was only a matter of time before we would inevitably look into its sequel, Space Quest II: Valhalla's Revenge. Space Quest II opens with a recap of the player character's last adventure, where the main character of the game would stop the titular Saurians from using their star generator to destroy his planet of Xenon. In the end, he was heralded as a hero for his actions and given a most prestigious prize for his efforts, the Golden Mop. But in the end, as is the unfortunate case of most sci-fi janitors, his name fell to obscurity. I mean, after all, how many sci-fi janitors can you name? And no, I mean outside of Scruffy.
Scruffy's gonna die the way he lived.
With the heroics over, the protagonist fades from obscurity as no one seems to remember his name, not even the game, which prompts the player to input their name, much like it did in the original game. And while of course we could name him whatever silly name under the moon, I opted to go for simplicity's sake and name him his default character name, Roger Wilco. And besides, Rowdy Roger Peepers wouldn't fit into the limited character space. But, whereas everyone might have forgotten who Roger is, as he works away in his promotion to head janitor on Orbital Station 4, where he is the only janitor stationed, there is one person who seems to remember Roger's actions, the titular Valhalla. Oh, but hold on, brief recap time. For those not versed in Space Quest lore, you might be wondering just who or what a Valhalla is, but Valhalla's name has appeared before in Space Quest 1, although it was never really much more than a passing name. In Space Quest 1, there was Dr./Valhalla, a man Roger encountered on the Arcada as it was attacked by the Saurians, warning him about the star generator. But he was also very dead by the end of that conversation, so much for revenge, huh? But we'll get to that part shortly, and for now, we begin our tale at the Xenon Orbital Station 4. After the briefest moment of fame and glory, Roger returns back to doing what he does best: janitorial lifestyle, working on the Xenon Orbital Station 4. Or at least when I say what he does best, I'm not actually sure of his capabilities of being a janitor per se. After all, that's yet another broom he's lost to the vast emptiness of space. But with his glory days behind him, he is resigned to his fate, sweeping away on the exterior of the ship, which, as we know, is a very deadly occupation, especially in a Sierra game, with Roger liable to flounder off the edge and drift off into the expanse of space forevermore. But safely inside, he returns back to the bridge, where he's chewed out by the boss, who tells him to visit the shuttle bay to clean a ship. But instead of finding a mess to clean, he instead finds himself in a serious personal mess, with hired goons hiding on board that bonk Roger over the head and take him away. Abducted from his life on Orbital Station 4, Roger awakes, standing in front of a large man connected by tubes. It looks like one of the Blue Man group lost a member and he might have let himself go a wee bit. The man welcomes Roger, introducing himself as Vohall, although differentiating himself from the dead man from the previous game known as Vohall, and instead refers to himself as Sludge Vohall. Now, are you confused yet? Well, good, because it's only going to get worse from here since there are a few different timelines of Space Quest, which makes things all the more complicated, covering both the original games and remakes, among other areas we'll just have to get to when we get there. But in this continuity, we'll talk about the original version of Sludge Vohall. Who is he? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Etc. Well, it's not quite agreed upon for his origins because many people theorise that Vohall and Sludge Vohall are in fact siblings, or at least clones of one another, despite looking vastly different from one another. Other people have another theory, where they believe that the scientist from the start of the Saurian encounters was not Vohall at all, and instead he was just a random person warning Roger about the star generator. And in that time, Vohall decided to turn evil, changing his name from Slash to Sludge, just to prove how evil he can be, I guess. Sludge Vohall claims that he is the genius who created the star generator to begin with him wanting to use it for war, but was hindered by his colleagues who refused, leading to the events of the Saurian encounter with the ship being attacked. As it turns out, the Saurians were employed by Sludge Vohall to steal back the star generator to be used for his nefarious purposes. But one thing arrived that Sludge could not have anticipated. A bumbling janitor who would single-handedly destroy the Saurians and the star generator itself. And as you can imagine, he is not quite happy. In fact, he is outright pissed, and now he wants revenge. Vohall's revenge. Do you get it? It's a name drop, yeah? Determined to doom Xenon without the use of the star generator, Vohall decides to move to his plan B of his terrifying schemes, infesting the planet with genetically engineered door-to-door life insurance salesmen. Truly a fate worse than death. And despite how easy it would be to murderalise a helpless Sierra protagonist, Sludge decides that he wants to make Roger suffer as one of his prisoners in the mines on the planet Labion, forced to toil away as a slave for the rest of his life. With the Vohall's revenge parameters satisfied, he bids the guards to take him away, and he's escorted down to the planet's surface by two ape-like aliens, who inadvertently spell their own doom when they both realise that they forgot to fuel the ship they're riding on, which plummets to the ground like Wile E. Coyote. Unfortunately for the duo of guards, but very fortunately for our intrepid janitorial hero, neither of the apes survive the plummet, with one of them being so kind to break Roger's fall as he gets up to find himself alone on the planet of Labion. And without his armed escorts, it leaves him to roam the harsh environments of Labion alone, which is just as deadly as you might think it would be, with man-eating mushrooms and whatever the heck this monstrosity is. And while the local flora are quite partial to killing nosy janitors, there exists further dangers, such as Sludge Vohall's patrolling lackeys, who will shoot Roger if he doesn't hide quick enough. Labion is truly a horrible hellscape for a Sierra adventure game protagonist to find himself, with death lingering at all corners of the world. But not everything is as vicious as the world makes it out to be. After all, while exploring the jungle, Roger happens upon a pink little alien that is caught in a trap that not only should he rescue, but he absolutely needs to. But more on that later. For now, this little alien provides some key insight into how to survive in this harsh and cruel environment. The first hint it provides is by appearing in the back of one area scavenging some berries that will become vital to Roger's survival. But to reach it, he needs to run the gauntlet. This is a very frustrating maze around a large tentacle monstrosity where Roger needs to pivot himself around the area without touching any of its tentacles, lest it ensnare him and then consume him. Well, why is this frustrating, you might ask? Well, for one, it requires very, very precise movement, which is made all the more difficult by the game's normal speed mode, so instead, the player may want to opt to set the game mode to slow, to help maneuver better. But even then, the game is pretty unfair and it straight up sometimes doesn't matter if you touch the vine or not. The monster will ensnare Roger and consume him, meaning the most valid means of surviving through the maze is by using a Sierra adventure game fan's greatest asset, the save button. What better way to make it through than by save scumming entirely through it and reloading when things go awry. And eventually, Roger finally reaches the other side of the field and fills his pockets with the copious amounts of berries the alien was seen taking before scurrying off to the right. But what now that we've made it through the aggravating maze puzzle? Well, if you thought that Roger could follow his new compadre, then you'd be wrong. No, we're going back through the entirety of it again. What fun. But for what purpose did we have to go through that nightmare? Why on earth do we need these berries that, quite frankly, smell rancid and Roger refuses to eat? Well, at the nearby swamp, the alien makes a reappearance, doing what one might assume to be a primitive jig in these ancient graphics before he runs off into the lake. It's a bit hard to tell with these old 80s graphics, but the reality is that he's rubbed the berries all over himself and it's something the player needs to consider doing too, because in the lake is a very hungry creature that has its eyes set on Roger and will kill him if he tries to cross over. That is, unless he copies what the alien did and smothers himself in some stankberry jam. With Roger being too stinky to eat, like a mouldy Stilton Blue, the hungry lad scurries off, put off by the overwhelming smell of Roger, which might be the first time that his distinct smell has benefited him in some way. With the beast now scared off, Roger manages to get back across the swamp and reaches a dead end, with nothing but a very obviously about to fall tree. Now when I say a dead end, I don't mean that kind of dead end. I mean in the literal sense. But don't worry, there's some of Sierra's good old fashioned dick moves approaching to really ruin Roger's day soon. Despite how obvious it is that it's about to keel over at any second, like most of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s, nothing I typed into the parser would work. I tried pushing it, which seemed like the obvious thing to do, but nothing would work. Until at last I gave up and looked up the solution, which instead told me that I had to have Roger climb the tree, which, as you might be aware, is a very stupid mistake to normally do in a Sierra game, but with Roger's weight, the tree falls, leaving a log to cross over to the other side to greener pastures. Or at least deadlier traps. Ensnared by a rope, one might assume that this is another game over. But it's one of the few times where this is actually something that needs to happen to proceed the game. Instead, Roger passes out from all the blood going to his head as he begins to dream of himself becoming Leisure Suit Larry, in an oh so very not subtle hint to its first game, which released a few months prior, the same year of 1987. Instead, he awakens inside of a cell, being held captive by a hunter alien, who is clearly a bit hungry, and what better way than to eat a fleshy and nosy janitor who just won't shut up. This is the first in quite a few dead ends in Space Quest 2 that have caused a bit of a notorious reputation for Sierra Adventure Games' difficulty. For the solution to this conundrum is by snatching a vital key item to aid in Roger's escape, and without it, he is doomed to become janitorial lunch meat for this hangry big boy, and unfortunately, it is very easily missed. So, let's reverse back to earlier when the item is acquired, where back in one of the clearings far to the west just prior to the tentacle maze is a plant that fires paralysing spores into the air, which causes whoever it comes into contact with to fall on the ground unresponsive. And the player will no doubt fall victim to this if they get too close to the plant, with Roger falling down to the ground and being uncontrollable. And while the game might look to be over, and the player is about to be taunted with a typical game over message, it turns out the effects of the spores are very much temporary, and Roger gets back up after some time passes. allowing him to pick up one of the unopened spores and snag it into his inventory. So let's fast forward back to the present, back in captivity, but this time coming with a secret weapon. But simply throwing it isn't enough at this point, because throwing it when the beast is far away isn't exactly going to win him any favours. Instead, he needs to lure the beast by talking with it, and at first this appears to not work, with the beast ignoring him. So the player might think, well, that didn't work. But this is a misdirect. And instead, the player needs to keep trying to talk to him, which attracts the hunter's attention and causes him to approach the cell. And bam! Once out of the spore, he is out like a light, allowing our janitorial friend to pilfer his captor's body and retrieve his salvation, the key to his cell. And while I thought the game might have been really cruel and forced the player to tie up the alien with a nearby rope to avoid another potential death, nothing actually comes about from this. The alien merely disappears after this encounter, but hey, free rope. But of course, that doesn't stop the game from giving a cheap game over on the next screen. Fuck you, game. There's actually nothing further over this side of the map, but when armed with his new rope, Roger takes it back to the fallen tree, and while that stump might seem to be a good option to tie it to, it'll soon come falling down after Roger, who plummets to his death.
Bruh.
So instead, he needs to tie it to the log itself, which is far more sturdier than its stumpy counterpart. Angling precariously between a rock and a hungry beast, Roger is stuck at an impasse, where he needs to swing the rope back and forth, despite how uncomfortably close it brings him to this absolute unit, who will grab and eat him if he gets too close. But he also needs to build up enough momentum to clear the gap, meaning he needs to swing as far as possible, otherwise he plummets to his death like a Looney Tunes character, which means there's a lot of trial and error here. But with enough precision and even more save scumming, he eventually clears the landing and takes him to his next reward, a dark and very foreboding cave. And how does the game repay the player after all that cursing and furious reloading? By giving them a potentially devious dead end. Yes. After all of that, the player may very well have just ruined their game, assuming they haven't gathered one very obscure item that is very easily missed if the player doesn't search for one particular spot. And I mean, it's very, very obscure. What Roger needs to survive in the deep dark caves is an item that will help illuminate the dark, which is vital to get through the cave without being eaten by a grue. So again, let's go back in time to grab the necessary item, which is incredibly deviously hidden away. So where is this elusive item? Oh, it's hidden back in the swamps, although it's not very clear on where unless the player roams all across the water. And would you want to spend any more time in there after being nearly scarfed down by that hungry alien from The Empire Strikes Back? The player needs to wander until they suddenly find themselves hip deep in water, where they can dive into the water and into the depths. But herein lies another bullshit puzzle that actually fries my brain. Because when trying to swim down below into the depths, the player might realise that Roger has the lung capacity of an asthmatic 7-year-old child. So much so that if the player simply tries to swim down, then Roger will always drown, which might suggest to the player that they need to find something to help them breathe underwater. But frustratingly, there is nothing that the player can get. There is no item that the player can find to do just that. So, what is the solution to this devious conundrum? Well, all you need to do is have Roger take a deep breath. I am not kidding. All the player needs to do is type "take a deep breath" and suddenly they can power through to the end of the caverns below, where they can clamber back up top to find a hidden cave, and where Roger will find a glowing gem. With the glowing gem lighting the way back down into the caverns, Roger reaches the end where the game tells him that the ground is broken away, and I nearly broke my monitor by punching it in rage as I thought this was yet another fucking game over. But in actuality, it's merely the plot moving forward, as Roger winds up in a new area inhabited by more of the springy aliens that he saved before. Or at least, He better have, because if he hasn't saved that little alien like a good little boy, then those guys will murder him in cold blood. But such cute little guys, they sure can be vicious, and if this were to be the case, then this would be yet another dead end. Hurrah! But as long as the dwellers aren't completely pissed off at Roger for deserting their friend and leaving him to become a snack for the big mean hunter, then they're friendly and beckon him to follow them to the next area. Here, a spokesperson for the people welcomes him to the canyon and indicates that they'll help him access the next area, but will need to close it off after him due to the dangers lurking inside. And by climbing down, they do indeed lock him in the pitch black darkness. I sure do hope you remember to pick up your glowing gem again, because if not, it looks like you've just trapped yourself into yet another dead end. But even this part of the game is very convoluted, even when equipped with the glowing gem, because with his hands full holding the ladder, he's unable to use it to light the room through normal means. That is, unless the player decides to stick it into one of his orifices. In the mouth, that is. Get your mind out the gutter and go play Leisure Suit Larry. By placing the gemstone in his mouth, he can explore the vast networks of catacombs underneath the ground, and through genuine luck, I just so happen to reach the end with no real issues, which is fortunate because deep inside lies some dangerous and nasty critters. But after crawling for what seems to be an eternity through the caverns, the player eventually reaches an open cavern of waterfalls, which eventually leads to a split in the river, and which is pretty much a coin toss to see if the player chooses the wrong path. The left path leads to sudden doom, as Roger falls off the edge of a waterfall and dies. So instead, yes, he takes the right path, which leads to him being sucked down into a whirlpool, which, you know, you'd think would also horribly kill and or maim Roger, but the game decides to be a lot more lenient to the player at this point, and instead it takes him outside. It's an open area. Oh wait, no, hold on a second. I just said that the game was going to be lenient to the player, didn't I? Sorry, no, my mistake. Of course it would never dream of that. Because while Roger might survive being squeezed out of the cavern's waterfall systems, there is a fate much more worse than death lying for him. For once again, Space Quest 2 just has to be very difficult to its players and to present them with yet another devious trap for them just in case they haven't been careful. And that's right, you've guessed it. It is yet another dead end. If the player hasn't grabbed yet another obscure item, then they have no means of proceeding past this point, which means it's either reloading an earlier save, or just outright restarting the entire game again from scratch. The item in question actually sits way back far in the past. In fact, it's in the same area where the player snags the spores from the plant, but instead the secret lies in an obscurely placed mailbox to the rear of the area. From the start of the game, Roger's inventory has a random order form for a free Lay Beyond Terror Beast mating whistle, which just so happens to be the planet we're currently on. It's very specific, but all part of the charm of Space Quest. But with this piece of Deus Ex Machina placed inside the mailbox, it automatically transports the whistle to Roger, allowing him to snag it. Amazon wishes their one-day deliveries could be just this good. As long as this whistle is on the player's person as they're shot out of the whirlpool, then they'll be safe. Relatively. Although the game doesn't really give any indication on what the solution to this conundrum is, the solution is to play the whistle in this one specific area, which causes a terror beast to break through a large rock and open the path, as it spins around and poses a new threat, as if it's the Tasmanian Devil himself. It's probably worth noting that the game could be exceptionally cruel to me at this point, as dodging the terror beast is difficult, and the game suggests a distraction in the form of a brain-tickling puzzle that Roger can throw at the Looney Tunes ripoff, and it will take some time to solve it. But the problem is that said puzzle is way back at the start of the game, and in my initial playthrough, I failed to pick it up, which, in normal circumstances, could have resulted in a very cruel dead end that would have resulted in me having to restart the entire game again, since the item in question is on the second screen of the game. But in a rare case of the developers being kind, The game doesn't deem it necessary, and the terror beast will simply vamoose if Roger exits and re-enters the area at the cost of some of those precious points. With the terror beast defeated, Roger continues on to his next challenge, and beyond this point is some tactical espionage action. Here, punished Roger needs to sneak his way past a lone sentry patrolling the landing platform. And as you can imagine, being spotted by the sentry is sudden death. This is a section where the developers of the game, Mark and Scott, could have been very cruel and caused a dead man walking scenario. After all, the best way to scoot on past this section is to pick up a rock and fire it at the sentry to knock him out using Roger's trusty athletic supporter. But that is something you would need to pick up alongside the puzzle at the start of the game. And as mentioned, I picked up neither during my first playthrough, and even if Roger was to gather these items at the start of the game, it would also mean that Roger could proceed if he didn't pick up a keycard from the splattered remains of his captors as he touched down upon the planet. But, in a refreshing mannerism, the game allows several methods of proceeding through this stealthy section. As mentioned, the player can safely knock the sentry out of a rock in his deadly fall, awarding the player the most points. But if he was to forget to pick up his prized possession and leave his junk unsupported, then he will need to sneak by the guard. But this method could also be determined by whether he picked up the keycard. If he did, all he needs to do is sneak up to the elevator door and swipe the keycard to access it. But if not, he instead needs to make some noise and make the guard come down to investigate. And as he looks around, Roger sneaks into the currently open elevator door.
Whose footprints are these?
Once safely past the sentry and up top the elevator, Roger accesses a spaceship primed to leave. And as much like Roger canonically would feel at this point, I was completely lost in what to do, with 3 areas to randomly press. These are the power button, the attitude dial, which, sounds radical, and the ascent thruster. With the power back on and the throttle pulled, Roger managed to break through the atmosphere and escape from the cruel grip of Labion, only for Sludge Fohol to appear on the screen once more to taunt him, and takes control of the ship to guide it back to his asteroid command base. You didn't think it'd be that easy, would you? Once again being toyed by his new foe, Roger is surprised to find that his progress around the base isn't quite as impeded as he thought it would be, with no guards arriving to arrest him. Instead, he's allowed to roam around the ship to his heart's content. Well, for the most part. At both sides of the spaceship are 2 exits, which lead to elevators, whereas an exit down the stairs leads to a trap, where the walls surround Roger and the floor begins to slowly open beneath him into acid, causing him to melt like ice cream. Which means that, for now, the elevators are the best method of staying unmelted. The elevators range between floor 1, 3, 4 and 5, with this floor being floor 1. And if you exclude the literal acid trip down the stairs, it's a safe haven here on Vohol's asteroid base. But as you might imagine, the other floors of the big bad guy's super secret headquarters are a lot more deadly. So what kind of dangers can you expect above in Vohol's domain? What legion of evil does the man have at his beck and call? Well, the biggest threat is the Floor Waxer, a patrolling cleaning device that will chase Roger down to buff and polish him until he's flat on the ground. I'm not joking when I say that these are probably the biggest threat and hindrance to Roger as he explores the ship, where these make for most of the chase sequences on board, appearing on every floor. And once you see it coming towards you, you better be sure to book it, because the only way to escape is by either finding a room to duck into to allow it to pass on by following its own course, or to run back to the elevator to remain safe. Trust me when I say that this might not seem to be much, but this shit is intense, especially when you don't know the prompt to the door and are left to simply become stretched on the floor as you furiously try to open the door. I cannot think of a more pitiful end to an epic space adventure. Roger's quest is to gather all the items he needs to help him to reach Vohall, who happens to be past the deadly acid pit, and what better way to bypass it than by going full Mission Impossible and by using a plunger found in Floor 3's janitorial closet to hang onto the entrapping walls, allowing Roger to gracefully avoid the acid pit, and more importantly, to avoid becoming Vohall's next flavour of soup. But of course, it's not as simple as that, as the next obstacle standing in his way makes an appearance. An army of Vohall's mechanical sentries who block Roger's way to the big bad boy himself. Which means that once more, Roger needs to diligently explore the top floors further to gather more items to help bypass such tight security. On floor 4, Roger needs to sneak past the murderous floor waxer and make his way into the bathroom, where he can enter the only unoccupied stall and snag some toilet paper. Whereas on floor 5, he finds a pair of overalls which hides a lighter which he snatches alongside a wastebasket. But floor 5 is also one of the more dangerous floors because it hides several more dangers alongside the floor waxer. The lesser of two evils here is a murderous alien that will bash Roger if he gets too close to its cell, although it's as simple as scooting a bit further away to survive. But on this floor lurks an even more dangerous threat, and it's straight up just a xenomorph from Alien, or at least with a nice shade of pink on its big old lips. It's truly your colour. The xenomorph is truly dangerous, determined to chase Roger down to plant a wet one on him with those big pillowy lips that would make most TikTok influencers envious. But where you might find that such a sloppy moment would result in an immediate death, the game decides to keep things going. For now. Let's get back to that later, shall we? But after expertly dodging both horny aliens and deadly floor waxers alike, Roger eventually gathers the final remaining items and brings them back down to the acid room. With his new toys, he sets about MacGyvering everything, placing the paper into the wastebasket and setting it on fire, causing the sprinkler systems to go off and causing the mechanical sentries to short circuit and break. With the robots out of the way, it allows Roger to confront his nemesis in the control room, surrounded by his hordes of salesmen. But of course, facing him head on doesn't exactly go as planned, as he proceeds to zap Roger with a laser. But surprisingly, of all the things to be hit with, this doesn't kill Roger, and instead shrinks him down to a teeny tiny size and keeps him in a glass chamber to prevent him from interfering with his most heinous of plans. Trapped inside the glass chamber, this is yet another example of Sierra's favourite method of torturing their audience. Once more, another dead end rears its ugly head, although not quite as devious as the others. Unless Roger managed to snag a glass cutter from the 4th floor, then he'll be trapped there for all eternity, or until Vohall gets bored and smooshes him. But as the player explores through the halls to the asteroid ship, they most likely would have found it regardless, and even if not, they'd hopefully have made a save shortly before, meaning it won't be as problematic as the other dead ends of the game. Free of his glass restraint, Roger can roam around the desk like a little bug, although much like a little bug, he's liable to get squashed by Vohall if he's spotted, meaning he needs to be a bit more stealthy and climb into the vent of his PC. And surprisingly, the interior of his computer isn't full of RGB #gamer lights, but instead has a very promising red button that just screams to be pushed, and which just so happens to be the button to turn off Vohall's life support. And without his life support, Vohall dies. But not before he taunts Roger, saying he's too late in typical villain fashion, running out of air and yet still has time to gloat as he begins to suffocate. Classic. By reversing the polarity of the laser to maximise its size once more, Roger returns back to normal and searches Vohall's body, finding the characters SHSR written on his hands. Now, naturally I figured this meant I would need to type this into the console to proceed, but alas, this is the problem with parsers, because no matter what I did, it would not recognise my command, and instead it appeared that there was nothing to be done from this computer screen. Instead, I decided it was time to mosey on and make my escape from the asteroid. But there was one mortal enemy standing in my way. If you thought that Vohall was Roger's true nemesis, then you would be mistaken, because there is one more insidious enemy lying in wait to murder Roger viciously. Stairs. Stairs are perhaps the most deadly enemy in not only Space Quest but pretty much the entire Sierra game catalogue. After all, Sierra game protagonists are liable to fall down and fracture many of their bones. And I am not kidding when I say that this was probably the most I died in this game, because trying to manoeuvre upstairs in this game is a bit of a task. In fact, much like the tentacle maze from earlier, the segment required me to slow down the game so I could expertly guide Roger up the stairs and not down onto the floor of a cracked skull. But once past the stairs of impending doom, the exit leads to a chamber of tubes, guiding Roger across a very scenic route across space. But as you can imagine, glass tubing isn't exactly the most safest for interstellar travel by foot, and predictably, the glass soon begins to crack and causes Roger to suffocate if he isn't careful. But the game is so kind enough to provide him with a mask at the start of the path, allowing him to safely bypass as long as he chooses to wear it immediately. The final scenes have Roger run through the corridors of the asteroid before reaching the escape pods, but they are blocked by the ED-209 from Robocop, and it is quick to dispatch Roger if he isn't fast enough to hit the escape pod button and duck inside. Vohall sure is a big fan of the 70s and 80s villains, huh? Due to how fast the robot is at snagging Roger, it might be best to stick the game settings to slow for this part. But once safely inside, the robot gives up the chase, allowing Roger to launch the escape pod into space. Having escaped from Vohall's asteroid ship safely, the game congratulates me for stopping the villain's threat of investing Xenon with Salesman. I don't think I did, but thank you for saying so anyway. But the danger hasn't averted quite yet, as the life support system indicates that the oxygen is running low on the ship. Instead, Roger needs to climb inside a sleeping chamber to prevent himself from suffocating to death, as he falls into a deep sleep, which brings the game to an end, as the narrator praises Roger for saving the day, before abruptly giving a message that completely retracts the congrats because I left Xenon to its fate. Whoops. But fortunately, it's just a case of reverting back to one of many saves, and instead going back to my earlier theory of using the computer. Unfortunately, this was indeed the cause of the bad ending, and in order to find the correct parser prompt, I had to look up a guide once more. As it turns out, the correct command prompt was to look at the screen, which brings up the menu, allowing the player to enter the code found on Vohall's hand, or typing in the word tits. Apparently that works too. With this, it ends the clone launching sequence in time to save Xenon, allowing the rest of the ending to pan out favourably and ending the game. But wait a minute, I hear you ask. What about the kissy alien? There was a whole lot of build up to that. Well, you're right, there normally is, because looking into it, it apparently means that it's laid an egg down Roger's throat and it's about to burst out like a chest hugger from Alien. And in theory, it should be yet another devious dead end, rearing its ugly head at the last possible moments of salvation to taunt and ruin the player's day. In fact, this is exactly why you might have noticed that I made several saves with the brackets Alien to distinguish this fact. I knew this was coming and was prepared to allow it happen and then to replay the section after by avoiding this alien's kiss. But here is the thing. Once I reached this part I expected it to doom me, it never happened. At no point during this dead man walking scenario did I actually see the chest hugger emerge. Even as I started waiting for a long time, waiting to see if it was a time sensitive section. When it never actually popped up, I just automatically assumed it would be a scripted sequence upon reaching a certain screen. But disappointingly, it never came up. So you know what that means? At this point for the rest of my series, Roger Wilco canonically has a xenomorph egg deep inside of him, just waiting to burst out. But he remains blissfully unaware of such a highly disturbing fate as he sleeps away in his escape pod, awaiting the third game to come out, and that it would in May 1989. Want to make sure you don't miss out on the next video on Space Quest 3, The Pirates of Pestilon? Then make sure you don't forget to subscribe to Noir Reservoir and click that little bell down there to be kept up to date on all future Noir Reservoir videos. And if you want to help support this channel, please consider liking the video and sharing it with any adventure game aficionados you think will appreciate it. And finally, why not consider following me on some of my other platforms? You can find me on my Twitter, Tumblr, or even my own Discord server for all the dank memes. I'm sure you won't regret it. Probably. So until next time my friends, I'll catch you later.